Apparently this is the working crew. The hobnobbers all left yesterday, and since our Grand Master South Dakota blew off out the door, we're safe. I'm very proud and humbled to represent several jurisdictions this morning. Of course, the Brothers of South Dakota, the Grand Lodge of South Dakota, the Grand Lodge of North Dakota, the Grand Lodge of Manitoba, and the Grand Lodge of Saskatchewan. And these brothers happen to be with us this morning, and if I do poorly, I might not make it to the bus. We're going to fire right off. It's not about me. One thing that a historian should know is that he is living off of those before him. It is a humble trail that you follow. And so you make your living off of those that came before. With that, we will move forward. If I get this first slide to work right, we're going to give it. This is a unique story. It is a volunteer fraternity, the Masons of Ruperts Land. And I don't know, how many people here have heard of Ruperts Land? We have a few. Ruperts Land was a British territory that actually reached into the United States. And because of Ruperts Land, a very unique part of Masonic history in North America developed. The Louisiana Purchase, of course, was made by and really conceived by our brothers. And as you see across the very top of the Louisiana Purchase, you'll see a little green corner that drops down into North Dakota, Minnesota, and South Dakota. It is that the Louisiana Purchase actually followed the Missouri and Mississippi River watershed. So any of the water that wound up down in the Mississippi was included in the Louisiana Purchase. It just so happens that that corner up there did not go into, let's go there, go into the Missouri and Mississippi drainage. It went north. We know for sure that the Masons of the Louisiana Purchase involved these gentlemen right here. Ben Franklin actually was the Grand Master of Philadelphia in 1732. Provincial Grand Masters of the Grand Lodge of Saskatchewan, right, of Scotland. James Monroe was appointed as the ambassador, envoy to France. And he actually followed Franklin, who was the first one. Franklin not only was the provincial Grand Master of Philadelphia, he became the head of the French Oriental Lodge. And as a result, he knew almost everything that was going on within the government of France, because that happened to be the National Society. And of all things, they appointed him the Grand Master in 1776. James Monroe followed him to take the spot of the envoy to France. And Robert Livingston was a 16-year past Grand Master of New York, who also was the Chancellor of New York. He swore George Washington in as president on the Bible, the New York Bible, the Masonic Bible. All three of these were very active participants. When Franklin found out about the purchase of the Louisiana Purchase being ceded from Spain to France, they wanted very badly, Thomas Jefferson very badly wanted the port of New Orleans. Because if he had the port of New Orleans, he would be able all the farm shipping, and the shipping would come out of there. It was only the intent of these two gentlemen that he sent, two brothers, that he sent to France to buy the port. Throughout the evening, they found out it was all for sale, and they said, why not? I'd love to have heard the conversation when they got back and said, by the way, President, we got you your port, we also got you something else. Meriwether Lewis is, as far as we know, the first Mason to come to North Dakota. And he was an active Mason. This right here is his apron. It was found in his waistcoat pocket when he was found dead on the Natchez Trail. The stains on the side are human blood, and most likely his, since it was in his pocket. Very unique, that apron. By the way, the apron can be found right now in the Grand Lodge office in Montana. in Helena, and it is their prized possession. How it got there is another story. I would like to just show you a couple features on this particular apron. Two of them, of course, are the pillars, Boaz and Jachin. The square and compass in the middle without the G. Same thing as I'm wearing, in fact. And of course, ironically, he had the hourglass and the signs on his apron, and it proved to be what his death ended very soonly. But that very little part in the middle, I would like you to remember, because you're going to see this again in a very unique place. Back to our watershed. This is the watershed that drains into Lake Winnipeg and eventually into Hudson Bay. And within this area, all the way down below Fargo and Lake Traverse area, that is draining into Canada, and that was part of the British territory of Ruperts Land. There is Ruperts Land. As you can see, it was a huge territory, very unique, all British, and over the period of the years, that particular boundary did cause some consternation, not only between our governments, but also between the Masons and the Grand Lodges, because there were differences of opinion of who belonged to who on an occasion. Our first real big thing in the United States and up in our area was the fur trade business. Over 50,000 furs a year went through this port, right here through this port. It was a huge, it was the end of the trail there, more or less, because it was at the confluence of the Yellowstone and Missouri rivers. And anyone that traveled up the river of the Missouri came to this point, including Lewis and Clark. This is where they stayed, both coming and going for a period of time. They went right through here. This fort was owned by John Jacob Astor, the American Fur Trading Company. John Jacob Astor actually was a Mason. He was the treasurer of the Grand Lodge in New York. And so, he was our first big entrepreneur in our territory. There's the city of St. Paul, Minnesota back in 1853, when the Grand Lodge of Minnesota was established. I think the brothers in Minnesota all know this. I just put this because this is our starting point of our Masonic journey. In the Sioux Uprising in 1863 and 1864, we were hearing some things yesterday about the Civil War. We had another war going on at that particular time, and it was actually the Sioux Uprising up in western Minnesota in the plains along the Red River of the North. A group of soldiers that came up from Fort Snelling, they came to Fort Abercrombie on the southern end of North Dakota on the river, and then eventually went north in that same year. And included in that group of soldiers was a gentleman and a brother by the name of C.W. Nash. C.W. Nash actually was the president of the Pioneer Press. He was an attorney, and what in the world he was doing out there with these guys is beyond me. But he was a brother. And he requested a dispensation for a lodge, on a military lodge, that they would have their masonry go with them up the river to Fort Pembina. And there is where it all began. On September 13 of 1863, he received his dispensation, and he proceeded to Pembina, and there they are. From there, a year later, the Louis Rebellion began in Manitoba. And the brothers from C.W. Nash and his friends went back down to Fort Abercrombie and eventually back to Minnesota. But the brothers that had come down from Manitoba, now this is British territory, you got to remember, so the British soldiers came down from what is now Winnipeg, or at that time the Red River Settlement. They came down and actually received, 10 of the brothers received degrees at Fort Pembina. So, when they split and went back, this group went back to Winnipeg and the other ones went back to Fort Abercrombie, these brothers from the soldiers of the British territory wished to bring their masonry with them. The Grand Master of Minnesota agreed, wrote a dispensation that said British territory on it. It was very cute. It was granted to Northern Lights Lodge of British territory. How Northern Lights got its name was that C.W. Nash one evening, when the Grand Master asked him what that lodge would be called, he was debating. He walked out of the door, and the Northern Lights high above him in the air. He says, that's what we're going to call it, the Northern Lights Lodge. There was one of the brothers that came down. By the time he was at the age of 14 years old, was a fellow named Bannatyne. Bannatyne, at 14 years old, actually became a figure in the Hudson Bay Fur Company. He was an entrepreneur, became the wealthiest man in the Red River settlement. He was also a member of this lodge, and the very first meeting that they had in Manitoba was held above this gentleman's store. Wrong way. There's Andrew Bannatyne. He eventually, when he passed away, actually was in Minneapolis, but his whole life, his major part of his life and his wealth and the work that he did for Masonry and for the businesses of Winnipeg or the Red River settlement were a big part of that city. In fact, is one of the major streets in Winnipeg right now is Bannatyne. Back to C.W. Nash. C.W. Nash was the first master of a lodge in Northern Dakota Territory, in what is now North Dakota. He went back to Minnesota without ever holding another office in the Grand Lodge. He was elected Grand Master. He went directly from being a brother to Grand Master. And in doing so, he issued the charter for the first Masonic lodge in North Dakota. So he was our first master and our first Grand Master. We attempted to find out where he went to. It took us about 3 or 4 years to find out what happened to him. He just disappeared from the face of the earth. Through a find a grave post one morning when we're looking, here comes a C.W. Nash and a military headstone in Phillips, South Dakota. Did a little research on the stone, and it says C.W. Nash Hatches Battalion on it. Our brother, with all of that behind him and being a big gun in the city of Minneapolis, wound up on a hill in a Masonic cemetery in Phillips, South Dakota, in complete obscurity. When the brothers of South Dakota found out who they had, the tune changed just a little bit. We have this story going on. We happen to have the territorial jewels, which are gorgeous. We have the those jewels in our Grand Lodge. They offered to give us the body in return for the jewels. They said they could keep them. This is Fort Buford, Dakota Territory, where the Yellowstone Lodge, number 88, was chartered. That is what it looked like. When the soldiers moved into Fort Buford on that very first day, Sitting Bull attacked them. And he continued to attack them on a daily basis throughout the time that he was in that area. Another view of the fort. There's an area way in the background, and that actually was the private area. And way back in there was the settler's store, and also the area where they built the Masonic Lodge. The brothers built a Masonic Lodge that was 80 feet by 100 feet, 2 stories. It became the social center for the fort, and it also housed the lodge on the top. There is the insignia. I happen to have one here. In 2009, we held a rededication of the lodge, and since that time, we have moved forward, and we built a new lodge, a small one, of course. But The chairs along the wall come from Whitehorse, South Dakota, down in the area where the Grand Lodge of South Dakota was formed, just about 70 miles away. In fact, the first Masonic Lodge dispensation was offered for Fort Randall, South Dakota, and this is only about 15 miles from where Fort Randall is. The chairs on the side, the master's chair and the ones on the round on the side, the old type, they actually came from Shiloh number 1 in Fargo, North Dakota, which was the first sister lodge to the Yellowstone Lodge. All of the history of the 50 original soldiers and brothers that were in that lodge are on the walls. So if you ever go up to Fort Buford, you can see the history of these brothers. Fort Buford and the masonry of Fort Buford is very unique. It not only was the first Masonic lodge in North Dakota, it also was the home of the first Prince Hall Lodge in all of Dakota Territory. Eureka Lodge number 135 was chartered in 1891 by the Prince Hall Grand Lodge of Missouri. It was chartered at Fort Apache, Arizona. Those particular brothers and soldiers were in the Geronimo campaign. And can you imagine leaving the Mexican border and coming to North Dakota and freezing your butts off? The transition must have been something. They called them the Buffalo Soldiers because the natives did, because of the fact that they wore buffalo robes, and also they had black curly hair, and if they were cornered, they were the most difficult soldiers to remove out of an area. In fact, Geronimo would actually go across the border into Mexico whenever he had a Buffalo Soldier unit trailing him. This Buffalo Soldier right here, unfortunately, just passed away within the last year or two. He's the real guy. He is sergeant out of Kansas City, and he came up to be with us and was an integral part. And when we did the dedication, he was standing alongside one of the fellows from the 6th Infantry, and it was the 6th Infantry that actually started our lodge. They were also the command officers of Gibbons, Montana colony. And it was quite an occasion. And there's another Buffalo Soldier. Last year, we dedicated the very first Masonic memorial to the Buffalo Soldiers. It is the only site in the United States dedicated to a military Masonic lodge, and also the Buffalo Soldiers. Charles Snodgrass Sr. was the 44-year Grand Secretary of the Grand Lodge of Prince Hall Grand Lodge of Minnesota. When they commissioned the artisan to make the horse, they asked him. And he sat down with the artisan, and what you see is his horse. And the first time I saw it, I said, boy, that horse is really skinny. It doesn't look good at all. He said, that's how my horse looked. He said, you have to remember, we were black. So we got what was handed down. So the soldiers, the white soldiers got the good horses, we got that. You ought to see what the natives got, because we took theirs. We hope to have him in South Dakota next year. There's some talk about having Brother Charles come down. He's 95 or 96 years old, a very bright man, very electronically adept. He had a little stroke here not too long ago, and he sees double, but we're working on getting him with us next year. Back to Ruperts land. As you can see, it covers a great part of the northern continent. It also included Saskatchewan. Fort Walsh in the Northwest Territory, it was a trading post in 1873, the headquarters of the Northwest Mounted Police by 1878. What really happened is that they had a massacre on June of 1873, it was a reverse massacre. Some Buffalo soldiers got a little too much fire water. They thought somebody had stole their horses. They came up from Montana into Canada, killed 26 of the natives at Fort Walsh, and then came back into the United States. There was some contention over this act and a couple of other things between the United States and Canada. And at that time, Canada was really a little concerned about what the United States might do as far as expanding their territory. And because of this incident, and in order to protect the natives, they instituted the Northwest Mounted Police. And about that same time, we have in 1864 the first public meeting which announced that they were going to have a lodge meeting in Manitoba. Their Grand Lodge was founded in 1875, but it also included Saskatchewan and the Yukon. It was a big Grand Lodge area. This gentleman had a lot to do with what happened in Masonry up there. If it wasn't for him and his friends, we would not have had the military, we would have not had all the influx of people coming into the country. And also the gold rush happened at about the same time, and it was a moment of turmoil. And as we were saying, during the time of the Confederacy and the Confederate War, in times of turmoil, Masonry seems to thrive. It's when things get tough, this fraternity seems to rise. We see it now. We're going to see more of this. But because of people like this, they were only defending their land. We were the invaders. This gentleman right here, Sitting Bull, really did a lot for us, believe it or not. He also did something for them. If you were a Northwest Mounted Police, according to the fellows that are the sages in that group, they will tell you that if you were a Mountie in Saskatchewan and you weren't a Mason, you damn well would be one within the time you left the barracks for training. This particular group of gentlemen right here, I'm going to introduce a couple of them because they are Grand Lodge officers. Don Ford is on the end, and I believe right now he is the Deputy Grand Master of Saskatchewan, correct? The one next to him is Dave Abel, most worshipful brother David Abel, who is he's one of our research guys on this thing that we are doing right now. I am very fortunate and humbled to be a part of this. We have selected 4 people to do this history that we're working on right now through Ruperts land. And Dave is going to be our representative from Saskatchewan who is going to give us the story of the Mounted Police, the Northwest Mounted Police Lodge, and how the territory was affected by Masonry at that end. The other person in the one is most worshipful Mike Rodman, past Grand Master of South Dakota, who is one of the outstanding historians in the Black Hills of South Dakota. And the third one will be coming from the province of Manitoba. We are still under consideration, and our Grand Master, I think, is holding the name, but we're going to have four researchers on this, and I happen to be the weakest link. On this particular photo right here, you see that there are 2 different types of uniforms. The one with the pith helmet is the first, they call their first parade uniform, because they actually did wear the helmets in those days in the 1800s. They didn't graduate into the Smokey the Bear hat until a few years later. But they have a very unique ability that most of us don't. When they came from the Northwest Mounted Police to the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, when they were renamed, one of the stipulations they put in there is that they wouldn't do the name change unless they could wear the Masonic regalia over top. And they were granted that. So they're one of the few that can wear Masonry over their uniform. There's our official banner. And if you go to Regina, you'll have the opportunity to see a gorgeous lodge. They have a beautiful, beautiful, looks like the the floor in London of their, what do I want to say, Parliament building. First white man to settle in the Black Hills was a fellow by the name of Fred Cross. Fred Cross carried a key fob with a Masonic emblem in it. Just so happened that, as far as we know, that it actually was the Keystone. And of course, when his friends developed the Keystone Line, I wonder where that name came from, also from the town. We researched that because there is some, they said, well, it came from the Keystone State. This is true. Guess who named the Keystone State? Because it was the center of the 13 colonies, it was the Keystone State. So, all of the area around Keystone and that area has a Masonic tie, including Mount Rushmore. Charles Rushmore was a land titleist. He was a lawyer from New York who came to the Black Hills to settle upon all the mines and the mine areas. Along with him was another fellow by the name of William Chalice, who was a miner, and another brother who was by the name of David Swansea, who was a miner. It turns out that all three were Masons. When they were out in the sticks doing this surveying job, Rushmore asked, "What's that mountain up there?" He said, "I'd like to use that for a point, a survey point." They said, "You know, it really doesn't have a name. Cougar Mountain, whole lot of mountains." Swansea said, "Why don't you just name it Rushmore? That way you will remember it." And so will we. They did. The name stuck. All three brothers that named it. By the way, David Swansea was a son of our brother Mason, or the son-in-law of our brother Mason, Charles Ingalls. Charles is a member of D. Smith Lodge in South Dakota. That's what Rushmore looked like. They just celebrated last year. South Dakota had a wonderful day of celebration for the rededication and anniversary of that mountain on the end. Deadwood Masonic Lodge in number 7 was chartered in June 1877. You have to realize that we didn't become statehood until 1889 when we separated. This lodge right here, most of the brothers from South Dakota that are with have spent a fair amount of time in it, but it has a big history. This particular little deal I put up because of Deadwood. The old square and compass, the G was never in the compass until about the time of Paul Revere. No one knows for sure why the G was put in. Although they said it's for God and geometry, we really don't know. And we don't know who did it. However, in the G, there are actually 4 distinct points in a real Masonic G. There are 3 points around the outside. As you see at the bottom, I've got a little light bulb here, I guess. Right there is 1, there's the 2nd, and there's the 3rd. There's the altar. In the G is your Masonic Lodge, as it's laid out on the floor. That is the true Masonic G. But where it came from, no clue. But you will see it in Deadwood at Mount Moriah Cemetery. Mount Moriah Cemetery, when the Masons laid out that cemetery, therefore the cemetery, they actually put in a whole complete lodge, an illusion. The pillars of Boaz and Jockin are the streets, right on either side. There's Boaz, there's Jockin. So if you're standing at Wild Bill Hickok's grave, just look up, and you're going to see the street saying Boaz, and Jockin is the next street down. In between these 2 streets, you're going to find this altar, right there. Now, the Holy Book is closed, however, it is still in the Master Mason degree. Why is that? Because it's a celestial lodge. The light is not visible to us. We have not crossed over. We have no knowledge of what lies beyond that cover. They put that in illusion, but right ahead, if you look, go on, you'll wind up here, going past the tree, and look at our Jeep. The whole lodge is there. And we're not going to show it all to you, because if you go to Deadwood and go to Mount Moriah, you get to follow the rest of it. There is it again. There's the G. And just this last month, they dedicated the lodge as a celestial lodge. Finally, the city of Deadwood, and everybody realized the history of what masonry was on the hill. And so now you can walk up there and see all of this. Soul Star, the Grand Master of Montana in 1873, became the mayor of Deadwood. There's his Grand Master's jewel. We didn't know it was there. South Dakota had no idea it was going close by, but Montana said, you know, we think there's something of Soul Stars in the Adams Museum in Deadwood. Went and looked, sure enough, and in a sealed envelope hidden away in a drawer somewhere in the back. They brought out this thing and they said, we don't know what it is, but this looks pretty nice. Thing's worth about $1 million. Guess where it is now? Still back in the envelope in the drawer. Apparently, they're not big on history up there at the museum. However, we are working on it. But Soul Star was a huge figure, and if you've seen the show Deadwood, and you will have seen what he was not only the mayor, he was a legislator. He became a huge figure in the Black Hills. Also, we have Seth Bullock, his buddy, the sheriff of Deadwood. Bullock was a very active Mason. When he died, he actually has his tombstone way up in the rocks above the cemetery for a particular reason, and it was because of Teddy Roosevelt. Teddy Roosevelt and Seth became great friends. So did Bullock. They started the S&B Ranch and the town of Alfouche, South Dakota. And when they died, Seth actually had a monument placed in his name. It's called Mount Roosevelt. This is a very unique story. This is also from the Black Hills area and the Battle of the Little Bighorn. Marcus Reno actually was a Mason. Marcus Reno became a Mason in Astoria, Washington, and then came back east to be with the 7th Cavalry and the 6th Infantry and the Cavalry units of the Little Bighorn. But he actually was a Mason prior to. The fellow beside him, Private Peter Thompson, was not a Mason. He became a Mason later on in life. What is unique about these two people is that Reno, when he came west, his wife passed away. The military would not let him go home. They said no. So he never had the opportunity to bury his wife or even console the small son that they had. It was the beginning of a downfall of Reno. The real problem came during the battle when he had to retreat, and from that point on, because of the death of Custer and the unwise moves that he made as a military officer, Reno got the blame. And eventually wound up at, of all places, Fort Abercrombie, where C.W. Nash first started, and that's where Reno was released and given a dishonorable discharge. Private Peter Thompson, his horse gave out on him. He was actually with the 7th Cavalry. His horse gave out on him going into the battle, and so on foot, while the battle raged, he was carrying water out of the Little Bighorn River up to the soldiers that had fallen in the middle of a real heated fight. He was shot twice, and Reno's troops pulled him out and saved him. He owed his life to Reno. He also got the Medal of Honor. So here's a Medal of Honor recipient that joins the lodge. And he started a lifelong campaign to bring our brother back. In 1967, the military reviewed Reno's case, realized that he was suffering from post-traumatic stress syndrome, reissued him an honorable discharge. He had been buried in an unmarked grave in Greenwood Cemetery in Washington, D.C. They exhumed his body, brought it to Billings, Montana. They had a full funeral for him, then went to the Little Bighorn, and gave him an 11-gun salute for a brevet general. There is the final resting place of Peter Thompson. 24-hour flag, the whole works. There's the final resting place of Brother Reno. One in the Hill of Glory. This man, this brother, is the only command officer with his troops buried at the Little Bighorn. We have the only Mason command officer in the Little Bighorn. And you notice it says Brevet General. One brother, an unknown man, became a Medal of Honor recipient, and that young Mason brought his other brother to the field of glory. What one Mason could do for another, you never know what that entered apprentice is going to do for you when you have a position. There's your proof. What's going on? We've got something going there, but it isn't transferring, is it? Well, at least it stopped when I slide, didn't it? Communicate. Okay, there is the Benteen battlefield. Our friend, our brother, Brother Thompson, finally was able to convince the U.S. Senate and the Congress to include the Benteen battlefield as part of the national park system. It took him, he never saw it. He never saw it in his real life. Shortly after he died is when the battlefield was finally dedicated. And is the last remark of what, like I said, what one young Mason can do for another. Of course, Teddy Roosevelt. He was a member of the Lodge in Oyster Bay, New York, and a very active Mason. I alluded to the fact that Seth Bullock had erected a tower just out of Deadwood, and from his grave he can see Mount Rushmore, or excuse me, Mount Roosevelt, where the Friendship Tower is located. And it's kind of an obscure place right now. However, the Grand Lodge of South Dakota next year is going to start working on this particular site as becoming a tourist attraction. So if you go to Deadwood and have the opportunity and ask where's Mount Roosevelt, they'll tell you it's just back over the hill on the other side of the canyon or on the other side of the ravine. So you have the cemetery on one side, Mount Roosevelt about a mile away. This is about it. I won't go any further. Obviously, we're short for time. And Winston had it correctly. What this is about today is just a preview of what this group and these 4 Grand Lodges is going to do. And that next year, when you come to South Dakota, we're going to have a real show for you. We're going to put together all these histories of the Mounties and the brothers in Manitoba and the Hudson Bay Company and the soldiers that traveled not only in the Custer and Indian War campaign, but there's so many other history. The area up there was phenomenal. We are steeped in Masonic life. Everywhere we look in this territory, in Ruperts land. Ruperts land being British, but it was British American. And these 2 countries and these provinces and the states together formed basically responsible for this. The International Peace Guard is on the border between Manitoba and North Dakota. Saskatchewan, Manitoba, North Dakota, and Minnesota all have contributed to this. We have the auditorium, the International Peace Garden Auditorium, that is for the International Music Camp. The Peace Garden Chapel, on the line, If you get married in the Peace Garden Chapel, be careful, because you could be on the wrong side of the line. I know one or two guys that actually stood in Canada just in case the marriage didn't work, and they could say it was but this is a brotherhood. We are special. There's nobody like us. We built these countries. We can prove it. We made the laws that give us the freedom. We can prove it. A historian must be able to prove. If they find one flaw in anything you say, you have lost your credibility. The truth is the same with this fraternity. Brothers, we cannot lose that credibility. We cannot give this up. You may have come here for any reason, but you came because you're a Mason. You came because you believe. You came because you know that as one group, when we get together, that we have the contacts, we have the resources, and we have the soul that it takes to make this country great. It is great. It is our job to keep it great. And I leave you this morning humbled that I can be one of you